This video is for chapter 1 in our book Media and Culture and Mass Communication, and it is the first section, Culture and the Evolution of Mass Communication. So it's probably good to start off by defining what exactly we're talking about. So we're talking about mass communication. What is communication? So in this case, we're talking about the creation and use of symbol systems. So symbol systems being things like letters, words. We could think about notes in music and how those things sound. So those are all systems of symbols, things that convey meaning from one person to another. And those symbol systems convey information and meaning. So again, my words, those convey meaning. If I wrote you an email, the letters that we write down on the page, those form a system that conveys a meaning that we kind of decide upon as a group from one person to another. And again, if I were to start singing, which I will not subject you to, then you would hear the notes that I sang, and they would convey certain meanings, whether it was a high note, a low note. If it's a very sad song, it might be slow and it might be low, versus if it was happy, it would probably be upbeat and quick and maybe a little bit higher in tempo and pitch. So it's a way for one person to tell someone something else. Now, we talk about communication in relation to culture. So in culture, we're talking about symbols of expression that individuals, groups, and societies use to make sense of daily life and values. So through culture, we see a society's values. The things that we choose to express tell us a lot about that society. My personal favorite example of this is that the way in which a culture swears tells you a lot about what they value in society. So, for example, in France, a lot of the swears are tied to religion. And if you know anything about the history of France, you'll know that they were kind of very involved along with Spain. They were very Catholic countries, and so Catholicism and Christianity are really rooted in what it means to be French, at least historically. And so because of that, that was so key to their culture that their swear words are all rooted in Christianity. Whereas if you go to Germany, apparently Germans are much more concerned about health and around how the body functions, and it's all about kind of, instead of the larger structure of the church, it's more about individualism, because all of their swears tend to be rooted around how your digestive system works. Very interesting. And in English-speaking countries, specifically the US and the UK, ours tend to be very gender-based and around sex and sexuality. So you can tell what the preoccupations are of various countries based around swearing. And this is true about things like the media that we create, how our images are, how our music is, how the movies that we put out. And so what is considered something that is revered in culture or not, or what's considered to be verboten, which literally means unspeakable, will tell you a lot about the values of that particular individual, group, or society. So that's what we're interested in, those kind of two things coming together. We're making these things so that we can tell somebody else something, and how the culture reacts to those things. So when we bring it all together in mass communication, we're designing cultural messages and stories, and we're delivering them to large and diverse audiences through mass media. So the media itself, which is again going out to the masses. So mass media, that's going to be cultural industries that produce and distribute that mass communication. So we're talking about everything from songs to books, novels, newspapers, TV shows, whether that's online streaming, whether that is on our actual cable or network TV, video games, internet services, internet service providers. We're talking about platforms like Facebook and Instagram, movies, and the whole TV versus movies is always blurring. Any kind of industry that's popped up around getting that media, that communication thing, to the masses, to everybody else outside. So where you're going from individuals and groups to society as a larger whole. So we didn't always have mass media. And it's really important to kind of acknowledge that where we are now is, it's part of kind of a long river. It's not like we're at the end of anything. We're still like in process, but that there's been a bunch of stuff that have led us to this position. We did not start off with being able to communicate with people halfway around the world. As an American living in Boston, or outside of Boston and Springfield, we couldn't 50 years ago easily communicate with someone in India. That just wasn't possible. We could get information to them, but it would take an awful long time, be a lot harder, and be a lot more expensive than it is today. And 100 years ago, it was even more so. So our ability to kind of what became a mass audience really shifted over time. So it's good to just start at the beginning and see how we got to where we are now. So you can see the kind of roots of mass media in ancient oral traditions. So, this idea didn't spring up fully formed, and it's not necessarily a Western idea either. There have been so many incarnations of distributing stories, distributing concepts and ideas and to a wide audience that stretch back millennia. But they didn't have the internet then, and that certainly has been an interesting development in the distribution of mass media. So there have been key technological breakthroughs that usually accompany transitions between various ages of media. So from oral into print, from print to different kind of electronic eras. And we're not just one electronic era with the internet, but you think about it, the telephone, that's also was brought about through electricity. And so what of those technological breakthroughs were significant, and how did that end up impacting society as a whole? None of these changes in mass media happened in a vacuum. They are all related to changes in society. So when we're talking about the fact that media reflects society, changes in the needs of society are going to bring about changes to technology. And those changes in technology might be in order to do mass media, or sometimes they're, for something else entirely, and mass media takes advantage of them. But no matter what, our societies are changing. And the changes in our society are what's driving innovation, be it through purely technological means or means of media. So it's also important to talk about discoveries, inventions, and the social circumstances that led to that. So your book talks about books. So we obviously had oral traditions, and then we get into printed products. One thing I would like to note in terms of the narratives that we go through, when we talk about printing in books, generally you hear about Gutenberg, you hear about Germany. And this is where, for me, the intersection of technology and culture is important, because it's not just pure technological breakthrough. The ability to use mechanical type that's modular and you can move around and print on a page was not discovered by Johannes Gutenberg in Germany. It existed about 100 years, maybe 200 years before, I can't remember the exact dates, but it existed in China. But I don't know how much you know about the Roman alphabet versus Chinese alphabets, but it's not as easy. You don't have the set number of letters in the alphabet that we have, where you can then easily mix and match them out to form letters and to form words. The way that Chinese script works is that there are much more intricate combinations, and those intricate combinations have much more subtlety and meaning. And so you need so many more characters to print the same page of print. And so while the technology was developed, it wasn't widely taken up. And so it wasn't until much later, when you've got Gutenberg in Germany having to, he's wanting to distribute books widely because there's been the Reformation. So there's been a cultural change in which we're trying to get the Bible out of the hands of the few into the hands of the many. And we also have a technological change where suddenly we're able to create paper in a, mechanical way and in a way that's very quick. Before, when you're using parchment, which is made from an animal, or you're using leather, then it's much more expensive and it's much harder to distribute. So we've got the dual inventions. It's not just Gutenberg and his mechanical type. That mechanical type isn't out of nowhere, but he's building on traditions from the East and trade with the East. But there's a need in Germany, and it's paired with the fact that in Italy we're making paper at the same time. So we can be able to have all these Bibles. The Gutenberg Bible is the first mass marketed product, and it's going to be distributed widely across Europe, hand in hand with the Protestant Reformation, which is trying to take the power out of the Catholic Church and put it into the hands of the people. So you've suddenly got that change. So we're mass marketing books, we're selling newspapers, we're selling pamphlets, we're selling all these things to people. So we've got things that are being widely distributed and sold, and you can also distribute them and sell them thanks to the fact that you can print and you can make up magazines, you can make up catalogs to sell people. So that's kind of our first breakthrough. Now we get to information. So kind of the first electronic age is when you're suddenly able to transmit information across the world, or at least as far as a telephone line will stretch, instantaneously. Instead of having to write a letter and put it in the mail and then wait for someone or a train to carry it to the other place, you're able to send information very quickly with the telegraph. So suddenly we're able to trade information in a real-time basis. So the news no longer takes, a week to find out what's happening on the other side of the United States. You can now find out relatively quickly, but that costs because there are only so many signals that can be sent at any given time. And so now there's a price to be paid for that information. Are you willing to pay it? So that's kind of the beginning of that electronic age. And at that point, and at each of these points, you can kind of see how these new technologies are disrupting what's currently in place. So you've got, for example, with books, you have the Protestants wanting to disrupt the Catholic Church, and they're using things like printing up pamphlets and printing up Bibles to distribute as a way of doing that. With the telegraph, you've got, the postal service, and you've got newspapers who are relying on, sending out print and through kind of very traditional analog ways, and now we're able to get information across to the telegraph. And the exact same thing is going to happen again once you get telephones, once you get fax, once you have the internet. There's always going to be something else. Again, when you suddenly can distribute music via the radio to people into their homes, that was revolutionary. The fact that you didn't have to wait until this was printed and then you have to go and get the late edition of the newspaper to find out what was happening in the day. You could turn on the radio and find up to the date information that's being broadcast this very second. And the same thing with the TV. So all of these things, the thing to kind of take away from it is that whenever there's a shift in this mass communication, there's always a disruption, and there's always an outcry, and there's always, oh my God. I think we've all lived through it with things like, oh my God, social media is gonna kill everything. No one's gonna be able to appreciate anything anymore. The way that we communicate through text and we don't use the phone. Oh, it's the end of our ability to communicate. It never is. It's always overstated. Guess what? Nothing's killed the book yet. But each of these things is going to be a disruptive force.